Imagine staring up at the night sky, surrounded by the endless expanse of stars, galaxies, and the vast unknown, and suddenly, it hits you. Half of the universe's matter is missing. You've seen the breathtaking images from the Hubble Space Telescope, read about the mysteries of dark matter, and heard all about the cosmic forces that shape our universe. But what if I told you that despite all our scientific advancements, there's something massive missing from the very fabric of reality? Half of the universe's matter just gone. It's a mystery that has puzzled astronomers, physicists, and even some of the brightest minds on the planet for decades, and no one has been able to explain where it's gone. Tonight, you're going to uncover the truth behind the missing baryons, the missing matter that we've known about for years, but still can't seem to find. And by the end of this video, you'll not only understand the biggest unsolved mystery in modern physics, but you will also discover a reality that might change the way you look at the universe forever. Stick with me, because we're about to dive deep into an enigma that has baffled scientists for over 50 years, and I promise, you won't look at the stars the same way again. The universe, as vast as it is made up of matter and energy that form everything we know, from the planets beneath our feet to the stars twinkling in the sky. In fact, we thought we knew exactly what made up all of this. For years, scientists have measured the mass and energy of the universe, and they were confident in their calculations. We were missing a significant chunk of it. The theory was simple: half of the matter we should be able to see, understand, and track was nowhere to be found. No, this isn't some new science fiction plot. This is real life, right now. This missing matter, called baryons, has been the subject of some of the most intense investigations in astrophysics. In a world where we're constantly on the hunt for new planets, new galaxies, and new stars, the question becomes, where are these baryons, and why is it so impossible to find them? Let's backtrack for a moment, because the missing baryons are one of those mysteries that is way bigger than just missing pieces of the universe. We're talking about a fundamental aspect of existence, something that can actually reshape how we understand the cosmos. Baryons are the building blocks of ordinary matter. You and I, the earth beneath us, the food we eat, all of it is made of baryons. These tiny particles make up protons and neutrons, the stuff that forms atoms. And yet, after decades of advanced research, these baryons have slipped through the cracks. We know they exist because the equations and models we use to study the universe rely on them. We know they should be out there, but scientists have struggled to pinpoint exactly where they are hiding. How can something so fundamental, so central to the structure of the universe, just vanish? It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such a gigantic question. You might be asking yourself, how could something this big be missing for so long without anyone noticing? That's exactly what we're going to explore together. In fact, this mystery, which is often referred to as the missing baryon problem, has led to some of the most innovative, intense, and jaw-dropping theories in modern science. For instance, did you know that some scientists believe these missing baryons might not just be hiding within our galaxy? Some have speculated that they could be scattered across the cosmic web, the vast, invisible network of gas and dark matter that connects galaxies like an immense spider's web stretching across the universe. But that still doesn't answer the question, why can't we find them? But before you rush to conclusions, let me tell you something even stranger. Scientists have actually found some of these missing baryons. The twist? They found them in the most unexpected places. Through the advanced tools and telescopes we now have access to, astronomers discovered that a significant portion of these baryons is not in the stars or the visible gas clouds where we expected them to be. No, these baryons are scattered in diffuse, nearly invisible clouds of gas between galaxies, so thin that they're nearly impossible to detect. Can you imagine? It's like we've been looking in the wrong places all along. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a much deeper mystery hiding beneath the surface of everything we thought we knew about the universe. But hold on, before you think you've got the whole story figured out, here's where things get even more mind-boggling. Despite detecting some of these stray baryons, the total amount still doesn't add up. If only part of the missing baryons have been found, where in the universe are the rest of them? Could they be hidden in a place we've never even thought to look? Could there be an entirely new force, phenomenon, or dimension that we haven't yet discovered? And could that be where the missing baryons are hiding? I'm going to take you on a journey through the history of this puzzle, right from its origins, back to when it was first recognized by scientists in the late 20th century. As we walk through decades of research, breakthroughs, and dead ends, you'll see just how far humanity has come in trying to answer one of the most profound questions in science today. You'll also meet the brilliant minds who've dedicated their lives to solving this problem, and along the way, you'll uncover the ideas that might just hold the key to finding the missing baryons for good. Now, I know you've probably heard about dark matter and dark energy. You've probably seen the headlines or watched a documentary or two about how they make up most of the universe's mass and energy. Well, the missing baryons are inextricably linked to these concepts, and understanding where they fit into the larger cosmic puzzle is essential if we're ever going to crack the code. Are these baryons hiding in dark matter? Or are they separate, lost in the invisible expanse of space, waiting for us to discover them? As we get closer to the answer, I'll tell you something even more astonishing. Some researchers believe that solving the missing baryon problem could be the key to understanding the very nature of the universe itself, its origins, its fate, and everything in between. You see, this isn't just about matter. It's about our place in the cosmos. It's about the connection between everything we see and everything we can't. If we can uncover where these baryons are hiding, we may be one step closer to answering some of the universe's biggest questions that could revolutionize our understanding of everything from the birth of stars to the end of the universe itself. But I need you to stay with me, because this is just the beginning. As we move deeper into this mystery, the theories become even more extraordinary, and the implications for our understanding of space and time might just blow your mind. Are you ready to discover what's been hiding in plain sight? The journey we're about to take could change everything you thought you knew about the universe. Stick around, because the real answers are just around the corner, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Are you ready? Stay tuned, and let's dive deeper into the missing baryon problem. As we dive deeper into this mystery, let's rewind a bit and take a closer look at how we even came to know about the missing baryons in the first place. The story doesn't start with just a single mind or a simple observation. It begins with decades of work, collaboration, and breakthrough moments that could have easily been overlooked. The more we learn about how scientists first stumbled upon this cosmic anomaly, the more we realize how much we take for granted about the universe, and how much we've missed in the search for answers. It was the 1970s when the issue of missing baryons first began to surface. Astronomers and astrophysicists had been collecting data for years, measuring the mass of galaxies, clusters, and the diffuse gas between them. They had expected a certain balance of matter in the universe, based on models of how galaxies form and evolve. Yet, as their measurements kept coming back short, missing nearly half of the mass they predicted, they were forced to face an uncomfortable truth. The universe was not behaving as it should. But instead of solving the problem, they were left scratching their heads. For a long time, these missing baryons weren't the subject of widespread debate. They were more of a footnote, a puzzle tucked into the margins of bigger, more pressing questions about dark matter, black holes, and the expanding universe. At first, the theories about where the missing baryons might be hiding were speculative at best. Some suggested that they were lurking in the halos of galaxies, barely detectable with the tools available at the time. Others, like the astronomers at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, believed that they could be found in the vast, invisible regions between galaxies, regions that were too diffuse to see, too faint to measure, and too subtle to detect. But despite these possibilities, a growing sense of frustration began to set in. No one could definitively say where all this missing matter was hiding, and more importantly, why it was so difficult to find. Fast forward a few decades, and things only got stranger. By the late 2000s, scientists had refined their technology, developing more advanced instruments like the X-ray satellites, which could observe the gas between galaxies more closely than ever before. It was during these observations that astronomers made a breakthrough. They detected faint traces of hot, ionized gas that could very well be the missing baryons, but it was scattered across the cosmic web, stretched thin across vast distances. Still, the numbers didn't add up. Even with all this new data, the baryons accounted for only a fraction of what should have been out there. The rest of the missing matter remained elusive, as if it had simply evaporated into the void. Now, let's talk about some of the key players who've dedicated their lives to solving this riddle, and how they might be part of a larger, more complex story than we initially realized. One of the lead scientists in the hunt for the missing baryons was Dr. Emily Harris, an astrophysicist whose career was shaped by the desire to understand the very building blocks of our universe. Harris had always been fascinated by the idea of the invisible, by things that were right in front of us but couldn't be seen with the naked eye. She was one of the first to hypothesize that the missing baryons were hidden in the cold, dark corners of the cosmic web, unseen but crucial to understanding the universe's structure. For years, her research seemed to point to the same conclusion. The baryons were there, just incredibly hard to find. But as Harris pushed deeper into the mystery, things started to take a strange turn. Her work began attracting attention from some unexpected places. Rumors circulated that she had been in contact with a secretive group of researchers who were not just interested in the missing baryons, but also in a much more controversial theory, one that suggested the baryons might not be missing at all, but rather displaced in some way, their movement hidden by unknown forces. Some whispered that this theory was less about science and more about speculation, driven by an almost desperate need to explain what was happening in the universe's most obscure corners. Then came the incident. In 2017, Harris was invited to a private conference held at an undisclosed location, an event that would change the course of her career. It was at this conference where she met Dr. Victor Klein, a brilliant but mysterious physicist known for his controversial theories about quantum mechanics and the fabric of space-time. Klein had a reputation for thinking outside the box, but his ideas had been largely dismissed by the mainstream scientific community. His involvement in the baryon problem, however, was different. He proposed that the missing baryons were somehow tied to a hidden dimension, an entirely new layer of reality that had been concealed from us by the laws of physics as we know them. Harris was skeptical, but Klein's data was compelling, and they struck up an unusual collaboration. As their work progressed, it became clear that something wasn't adding up. Klein's theories became more abstract, and his involvement with a shadowy organization known only as the Order raised suspicions. Was he truly seeking the truth, or was he pursuing something darker, something that could shake the foundations of science itself? Harris began to feel that the deeper they dug, the more she was losing her grip on what was real. The information they were uncovering about the baryons started to take strange turns, almost like someone, or something, was manipulating their findings. Harris wasn't the only one who started feeling uncomfortable. Her colleagues began noticing strange discrepancies in their data, and some even claimed to have seen mysterious figures lurking around their lab. The question that had once seemed so straightforward, "Where are the baryons?" was now entangled in a web of secrecy, hidden agendas, and unexplained phenomena. Was the missing matter truly just an unsolved cosmic puzzle, or was there something more sinister at play? Could Klein's bizarre theory about hidden dimensions actually be connected to the disappearance of the baryons? And why was a growing number of scientists beginning to distance themselves from Harris as she pursued this line of inquiry? What started as a straightforward scientific investigation had become a much darker, more uncertain path. With every new discovery, more questions arose, questions that could unravel everything we thought we knew about the universe. And as Harris and Klein delved deeper into the secretive corners of the scientific community, the stakes grew higher. Their discoveries threatened to expose truths that no one was ready to face. If the missing baryons were really the key to understanding hidden dimensions, what else might we uncover in the process? And more importantly, would we be ready to accept the consequences? The tension is mounting. With each passing day, the answers seem just out of reach. And as Harris digs deeper into the mystery, she begins to realize that she might not be the only one looking for the missing baryons. Something or someone might be following her every step. But who can she trust in a world where the boundaries between science and secrecy are blurred? As Harris continued her investigation into the missing baryons, the sense of foreboding that had begun to settle over her grew stronger. The further she delved into Klein's theories and the deeper she pushed into the unknown, the more bizarre and unnerving the situation became. The data was leading them to the edge of something revolutionary, something that could reshape the very fabric of our understanding of the universe. But with each breakthrough, the obstacles multiplied, and they became more insurmountable than she could have ever anticipated. It started small, almost imperceptible at first, glitches in the data, faint discrepancies that seemed too coincidental to ignore. But when the key piece of evidence they had been relying on for weeks mysteriously disappeared, things took a darker turn. Harris had been working with a highly classified set of satellite images that could potentially show the exact location of the missing baryons. These images, captured by a high-resolution telescope located at a remote observatory in Chile, had been the final piece of the puzzle. But the morning she was scheduled to present the data to her team, the images were gone. She retraced her steps, checked her email, and even reached out to the observatory, only to be told that the images had been corrupted. No explanation. No backup data. It was as though the universe itself had conspired to erase that evidence from existence. Harris felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately erased the images, and it wasn't just any someone. She'd heard whispers around the office about a shadowy faction within the scientific community, a group whose motives were as obscure as their methods. Some of her colleagues had even joked about the hidden hands pulling the strings behind major scientific decisions. Harris had laughed it off before, assuming they were just conspiracy theorists. But now, in the pit of her gut, something told her that these rumors might not be so far-fetched after all. The mounting frustration soon turned into paranoia. Every phone call felt like it was being monitored. Every email felt like it was being read. She reached out to Klein, hoping he might have an explanation, but his response was vague and evasive, more concerned with his own theories than with the missing data. It wasn't long before Harris began to suspect that Klein himself might be hiding something from her. Was he truly on her side? Or had he been using her to further his own agenda all along? The further she investigated, the more certain she became that Klein wasn't just a collaborator. He might have been playing her from the very beginning. But it wasn't just Klein she had to worry about. Her phone began to ring at odd hours, the voice on the other end always masked, never revealing their identity. Each time, the message was the same. "Stop digging, Dr. Harris. There's nothing more to find." At first, she thought it was a prank, someone trying to scare her, to distract her from the truth. But when the calls kept coming, each one more urgent than the last, the message began to feel less like a threat and more like a warning. And then, a visit from an old friend turned into something much more sinister. Dr. Julian Wallace, a former colleague and close friend of Harris, came to see her one evening. They'd shared countless conversations over the years, and his support had always been a comforting constant. But this time, he seemed different. There was a coldness in his eyes, a tension in his voice that wasn't there before. He warned her to stop her investigation into the baryons, insisting that she was getting too close to something dangerous. At first, Harris believed it was just concern for her safety, but there was something in the way Wallace spoke that felt off. It was almost as if he was too afraid of what might happen if she continued. But what could he be afraid of? Had he known something she didn't? Harris pressed him for answers, but Wallace grew increasingly evasive. His body language shifted from defensive to outright hostile, and Harris began to wonder if there was something deeper at play. Had Wallace known about the hidden dimensions Klein had been hinting at all along? Was he involved in the same shadowy organization that had been erasing their data? Or had he betrayed her long before she realized it? Wallace had always been a staunch advocate for scientific integrity, yet now, he seemed to be urging her to abandon her pursuit of the truth. The more Harris thought about it, the more she began to connect the dots. Wallace's sudden shift in behavior, the disappearance of the satellite images, the cryptic phone calls, all of it felt too orchestrated, too calculated to be coincidence. Someone was trying to stop her, and they were going to any lengths to do so. But the question was, who?
And why?
Was there more to the missing baryons than anyone had ever realized? What were they really hiding? And how far were people willing to go to keep the truth buried? Despite the pressure mounting from every angle, Harris couldn't back down. She knew she was close, perhaps closer than anyone else had ever been. The baryons weren't just some abstract cosmic puzzle. They were a key to something far bigger, something that could change everything about how we understood the universe. But now, with every lead turning colder and every ally becoming more suspicious, Harris found herself trapped in a web of secrecy and fear. What had started as a search for missing matter was now a race against time to uncover the truth before it vanished entirely, before it was hidden from her forever. And just as she thought she might be able to connect the final pieces of the puzzle, an unexpected email arrived in her inbox. The subject line simply read, "We know what you're looking for. Stop now or else." Harris hesitated for a long moment before clicking it open. What she found inside sent chills down her spine. The email wasn't from any of the usual suspects. It came from an unknown source, someone with access to her research and private files. But even more unsettling than the message itself was the attachment, a single, blurry photograph of a familiar face. It was Klein, but this time, he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was someone Harris had never seen before, someone she thought had disappeared from her life years ago. The photograph was a warning. But what did it mean? And who was this new person lurking in the shadows of Harris's investigation? With no answers and only more questions, Harris was left with one terrifying thought. She wasn't just uncovering the truth. She was uncovering something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Harris sat frozen, staring at the blurry photograph of Klein and the unknown figure. She felt a creeping unease settle over her. Who was this person, and why were they suddenly inserted into the middle of her investigation? She couldn't shake the feeling that this photograph was more than just a threat. It was a direct challenge. Someone, perhaps more powerful than she had ever imagined, was watching her every move. It wasn't just Klein anymore. He was only a piece of the puzzle, and there were far larger forces at play, pulling strings in ways she couldn't comprehend. But just as she was about to dive deeper into the mystery of the photograph, something unexpected happened, something that would throw her whole world off balance and send her spiraling further into doubt. A few days later, as Harris tried to focus on reviewing the data she had painstakingly gathered, her phone rang. It was her brother, Daniel, calling from New York. At first, the conversation felt mundane, typical family chatter. He'd been going through some work issues, and she had listened patiently, offering advice. But then the tone shifted. Daniel hesitated before saying, "Harris, something strange happened today." Harris's stomach dropped as she recognized the familiar sense of worry creeping into his voice. "What do you mean, strange?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Daniel explained that he had received a package at his apartment, one that had no return address. When he opened it, inside was a single sheet of paper written in the same cryptic handwriting that had appeared in her mysterious email. The message read, "Tell Harris to stop. This is bigger than she realizes." Harris's pulse quickened as she realized the enormity of what was happening. This wasn't just about her anymore. It had escalated beyond her personal research. Whoever was behind this, whoever had sent that message, was now targeting her family. The threat wasn't just aimed at her career or her reputation. It was a direct warning, a sign that the people pulling the strings were willing to go to extreme lengths to keep the truth buried. Her heart raced, the weight of the situation sinking in. She couldn't let this go any further. She needed to protect her family, and yet, she couldn't stop. The truth was too important. She had already come too far. But she wasn't sure how much more she could endure. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But as she tried to process the threat to Daniel, another unsettling development unfolded. Harris received a package of her own. Unlike the previous communications, this one was not anonymous. The return address was the observatory in Chile, the very place where the missing satellite images had been erased. Inside the box was a single disk with no markings, but the unmistakable weight of something important was evident. She inserted the disk into her computer, bracing herself for what it might contain. What she found was a video recording, its resolution grainy, but unmistakably real. In the video, Klein appeared again, but this time, he was not alone. He was in a dimly lit room, surrounded by several other individuals whose faces were obscured by shadows. They were discussing something in hushed tones, speaking in a language Harris couldn't understand, though one word kept recurring: Baryon. It wasn't the content of the conversation that disturbed her. It was the chilling implication that Klein was involved in something far deeper than she had anticipated. He was part of something, a covert operation, perhaps, or a larger network of scientists or even governments, all with a vested interest in the missing baryons. But the most unsettling part of the video came at the end. One of the shadowy figures, a voice muffled and distorted, turned to Klein and said, "If Harris keeps pushing, we'll have to eliminate her." The words hung in the air, thick with menace, leaving Harris with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Klein had known about the threat to her, but he hadn't warned her. In fact, it seemed as though he had been a part of it all along. Harris tried to remain calm, but her mind raced with 1,000 questions. What exactly was Klein involved in? What had he been hiding? Had he been working with these people all along? And more importantly, why hadn't he told her? Had their collaboration been nothing more than a setup from the start, or had Klein been manipulated too? What was the true purpose behind the missing baryons? The more she uncovered, the more questions arose, and the less she understood. But there was one thing she was certain of: she couldn't trust Klein anymore. The shadowy group in the video had clearly marked her as a threat, and now she was caught in a deadly game she wasn't sure she could win. Her world was spiraling, and just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, an even darker twist emerged. The following day, Harris received an anonymous tip. The message was brief, just a single line of text. "The baryons are gone. But they're not the only thing you've been looking for." At first, she didn't understand. What did that even mean? Was it a cryptic warning? Or was someone trying to throw her off course? As she dug deeper, however, she discovered that the message referred to something far darker than just the baryons. There were other secrets, other phenomena connected to the missing matter, things that had been hidden for decades, things that had the potential to change everything Harris thought she knew about science, the universe, and even her own past. But just as she began to piece together the significance of this new clue, a strange knock echoed through her apartment door. When she opened it, no one was there. But lying on her doorstep was a small, weathered book, its pages yellowed with age. It looked ordinary, unremarkable even, but something about it sent a shiver down her spine. On the cover, there were only 3 words, barely visible in the fading ink: "The final equation." The deeper Harris sank into this web of conspiracies and hidden truths, the more tangled everything became. Each step forward only led to more questions and more terrifying threats. Who could she trust? Was anyone involved in this investigation truly on her side? Or was she just a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game? Harris had no answers, but one thing was certain: she had no choice but to keep going. But the more she uncovered, the more the stakes grew. The truth was slipping through her fingers, and someone, somewhere, was determined to make sure it stayed that way. The night was quiet, too quiet for Harris's liking. She had always found a kind of peace in the stillness, but tonight, it felt suffocating. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in on her, as though they were closing in on her sanity. After the disturbing video, the cryptic message about the baryons, and the chilling warning from her brother, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. Every movement felt observed. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. There was no more room for doubt. She was being hunted, though she still didn't fully understand why. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and every answer only seemed to lead to more questions. But it was in the silence of that night that Harris realized something far worse had just begun. It started with a strange feeling in her gut, a gut instinct, maybe, or perhaps something deeper, more primal. She had always trusted her intuition, especially when it came to matters of danger. But tonight, it felt more like an all-consuming presence. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the apartment was empty. Still, the feeling didn't let up. She pushed it aside and returned to her work, trying to focus on the latest set of encrypted data she had uncovered, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction, every step she had taken in the last few weeks. Had she missed something? Had she overlooked a warning sign? Then, a sudden knock on the door shattered the stillness. Harris froze. It wasn't a normal knock, the kind you'd expect from a neighbor or a delivery person. It was frantic, urgent, like someone who knew she was inside and needed to get in. Her heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, she reached for the nearest object, a heavy book, ready to defend herself. Hesitant but curious, she slowly approached the door, her hand shaking as she gripped the handle. But as she peeked through the peephole, she saw nothing. No one was there. For a split second, she considered opening the door, but something inside her screamed not to. She stepped back, the fear crawling up her spine, but just as she turned to retreat, she heard it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps, moving away from her door. She rushed to the window, peering through the blinds, but the street outside was empty. It was late, and no one was around, just the occasional car driving past, its headlights casting long shadows down the road. But the unease wouldn't leave her. She wasn't alone, and she knew it. Someone was out there, someone who knew exactly what she had uncovered, and they weren't going to stop until she was silenced. It wasn't until the next morning that things took a darker turn. Harris was jolted awake by a phone call, the sound of it cutting through the heavy fog of sleep that had clung to her. The voice on the other end was low, urgent, but oddly calm. It was Daniel. "Harris, you need to listen to me. Something's happened. Lisa's gone. I can't find her." Harris felt the air rush from her lungs as the words hit her like a freight train. Lisa, his wife, her closest friend. How could she just disappear? What was going on? Daniel's voice trembled as he continued. I don't know what to do. I came home late last night, and she was gone. Her things were still here. Her purse, her phone, her coat. Nothing was touched. But she's just gone, Harris. I'm starting to think something's wrong. Something bigger than we realize. Harris tried to stay calm, to think rationally, but she could feel the walls closing in on her. What did this mean? How could Lisa just vanish without a trace? Was this connected to the messages? Was this the work of the shadowy figures behind the Baryon conspiracy, or was it something else entirely? Had Lisa been targeted because of her connection to Harris? The fear in Daniel's voice was real, and it only intensified Harris's growing paranoia. Harris had to act quickly. She grabbed her jacket and headed for Daniel's apartment, but as she stepped outside, she had an overwhelming sense of being followed. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she scanned the street, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a man walking across the street, his movements stiff and deliberate. He wasn't looking at her directly, but something about the way he carried himself made her feel exposed, like a predator was in the midst of its hunt. He wasn't the only one. Everywhere she looked, there were people moving in the background, casting long, unnatural shadows. Her skin crawled as she realized she wasn't imagining it. She was being watched, and every step she took was being monitored. The drive to Daniel's place felt like an eternity, her grip tight on the steering wheel, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the car behind her, keeping pace with every turn she made. She sped up, her heart thundering in her chest, but the car behind her remained right on her tail. Just as she was about to turn onto Daniel Street, she swerved to avoid a pothole, and when she glanced back, the car was gone. It was as if they had vanished, slipping into the shadows like ghosts. But Harris knew better. She knew this was no coincidence. Someone was trying to scare her, to make her slip up. And it was working. By the time she arrived at Daniel's apartment, her anxiety had reached its peak. Daniel was pacing in the living room, his face pale and drawn. "She's gone, Harris. It's like she never existed," he said, voice cracking. His desperation was palpable, but there was something else in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. Fear. And anger. Harris felt it too. The world they had known, the world where things made sense, was crumbling. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everything. I don't understand it, Harris. The people who've been following you, they've been following me too, Daniel confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Harris's heart skipped. This was more than just a strange coincidence. These people were connected. They weren't just after her, they were after everyone she cared about. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized how little she truly knew about the forces she was up against. The mystery was deeper than she had ever imagined, and each step forward brought her closer to an inescapable darkness. As the room seemed to close in around her, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Lisa's disappearance was only the beginning. What if Daniel was next? What if it was her family who would pay the price for the truth? She thought back to the cryptic warnings, the hidden messages, the eerie sense of being watched. Someone was out there, pulling strings, orchestrating a much larger game. And in the end, they would stop at nothing to keep the secrets of the Baryons, and whatever else they were hiding, buried for good. But just as Harris began to formulate a plan, the phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Her heart pounded as she picked up the call. A voice on the other end spoke, calm and cold. "You've gone too far, Harris. If you keep digging, the next one to disappear will be you." And with that, the line went dead. As Harris sat there, her hand trembling from the chilling call, she tried to steady her breath. The words from the mysterious voice still echoed in her mind, the weight of the threat sinking in. "The next one to disappear will be you." She glanced over at Daniel, who had been pacing back and forth, lost in his thoughts. He seemed unaware of the deepening chaos around them, but Harris couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. This was no longer just a scientific mystery, it was personal, and it was dangerous. The deeper they went, the more it seemed like someone was playing a game with their lives, pulling the strings from the shadows. But then, as if the universe had decided to test her further, a moment of clarity broke through the fog. Something clicked, and Harris's mind raced back to a conversation she had with Daniel only days before everything had spiraled out of control. They were sitting in a cafe, discussing the Baryon anomaly and the strange patterns in the data she had been analyzing. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than a curious but obscure scientific problem, a small anomaly that no one really understood. But now, with everything that had happened, Harris wondered if the missing baryons weren't just a mystery of physics, but a far deeper, far darker conspiracy. What if they had been looking at it all wrong? What if everything they thought they knew about the baryon problem had been designed to mislead them? The more Harris thought about it, the more she started to doubt her own conclusions. The recent events, Lisa's disappearance, the threats, the strange people tailing them, none of it seemed random anymore. Harris felt the room close in on her. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. The vulnerability in his tone stirred something in her, something deep inside her, a need to protect, to fight, to trust him once again. But at the same time, the nagging feeling in her gut refused to let go. Everything she had uncovered, all the cryptic messages, the mysterious disappearances, the hidden agendas, it all seemed to point to one thing. She couldn't afford to trust anyone. Not even Daniel. Especially not Daniel. "You don't understand," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. "You can't just walk into this. You have no idea what's really at stake here. What you're really up against." They weren't just dealing with rogue scientists or government secrets. Someone or something was orchestrating this. Someone who had been working behind the scenes, guiding them into a trap. Her mind flicked back to that call, the voice on the other end, cold and menacing. There was something in the way it spoke to her, something familiar about it, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She replayed the words in her mind, trying to figure out who would want to warn her. And then, it hit her like a slap to the face. The voice. It wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel's. Or at least, it sounded like him. Harris's stomach dropped. Was Daniel playing her all along? Had he been feeding her information, leading her deeper into the rabbit hole, knowing exactly what she would uncover? He had always been by her side, but what if he wasn't the ally he appeared to be? What if his role in all of this was far more complicated? She turned to him now, watching as he stared absently out the window. There was a tense silence between them, the weight of her growing suspicion pressing down on her. "Daniel," Harris said, her voice a little more strained than she intended. "Is there something you're not telling me?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he didn't say anything. It was like he was debating whether or not to reveal something, and the tension in the room thickened as the seconds stretched on. Finally, he spoke, his voice just above a whisper. "You don't know the whole story, Harris. None of you do." The words felt like a punch to the gut.
"What do you mean by that?"
Daniel took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that felt almost like a warning. "The Baryon problem, it's not just a scientific mystery. It's bigger than that. You've been digging into something you don't fully understand. You've been digging into something I've been trying to protect you from." Harris felt a wave of disbelief crash over her. She had trusted Daniel, had thought he was just as invested in the truth as she was. But now, the more he spoke, the more she realized she had no idea who he really was or what his true intentions were. "Protect me from what?" she asked, her voice low, barely above a whisper. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Harris, there are people out there who want to use this information. They don't care about the science. They care about control. They care about power. And they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." The pieces weren't adding up. Harris tried to process his words, but the more she did, the more confused and uneasy she became. What was he really saying? Had everything she uncovered, every lead, every clue, been part of a plan to mislead her? Had Daniel been a part of it? Or had he been manipulated too? Before she could voice her questions, her phone buzzed, its screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. It wasn't a call she was prepared for, but something in her gut told her to pick up. She grabbed the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so. "Harris, I hope you're ready for what's coming. It's too late to back out now." Her blood ran cold. She recognized the voice. It was the same one from the threatening call. But now, something was different. There was no threat, no veiled warning. Just a strange sense of finality. "Who is this?" she demanded. "Let's just say, I'm someone who's been watching you. Someone who knows the truth about what's been hidden. The Baryons aren't the real story, Harris. They're the cover-up." The words hit her like a wave. Cover-up? What the hell was going on? She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper. But before she could, the line went dead. The room felt suffocating. Harris looked at Daniel, her mind racing. His face had gone pale, the same unease she felt reflecting in his eyes. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice strained. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I think we've been looking at this all wrong. The Baryons are just the tip of the iceberg. Someone's hiding something much bigger." And as the realization dawned on her, the weight of it all seemed to crush down on her chest. The conspiracy wasn't just about a scientific anomaly. It was about control, about power, about something much darker than she could have ever imagined. And the worst part? She had no idea who she could trust anymore. Was Daniel playing both sides? Or had he been drawn into this just as she had? The truth was slipping further from her grasp, and the closer she got, the more the danger seemed to close in. But one thing was clear. Someone was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. And now, Harris was right in the middle of it all. Harris paced back and forth, her mind a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and dread. The phone call, the mysterious voice, it was all too much to process in a single moment. But it wasn't just the cryptic threats that had her on edge. It was the sinking feeling that her life, her work, everything she'd fought for, was rapidly slipping through her fingers. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. She couldn't afford to trust anyone. Her phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with a message from an unknown number. "You know where to find me. Meet me tonight, or you'll never see the truth." It was a clear ultimatum, a choice that would shape everything. Harris felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The voice on the other end had been calm, too calm, like they knew something she didn't. There was no ambiguity in their words. If she didn't show up, she would never get the answers she desperately sought. But if she did, if she walked right into the lion's den, What kind of danger would she be walking into? What was waiting for her? And who could she trust? She turned to Daniel, her heart pounding in her chest. He was sitting on the couch, head in his hands, his fingers running through his hair, as though he was fighting an inner battle. There was something about him now, something dark, something unrecognizable. He had been by her side through this entire ordeal, but now, the trust she had once placed in him seemed like an illusion. The more she tried to reason with herself, the more doubts crept in. Was he part of this? Was he feeding her half-truths? Or worse, was he playing the part of the unwitting accomplice, a puppet just as tangled in this web as she was? "I have to go," Harris said, her voice shaking as she spoke. She didn't even fully understand why she was saying it, why the words left her lips. Maybe it was the need for closure, or maybe it was the need to make sense of everything. The moment she said it, however, she knew there was no turning back. "Go where?" Daniel's voice cracked, his eyes lifting to meet hers. He didn't look like the man she had known, the one who had been her partner, her confidant. He looked broken, lost, like a man on the brink of a breakdown. "To meet someone. I have to figure out what's going on, Daniel." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel stared at her, and for the briefest of seconds, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of fear, of anger, but most of all, something that looked like guilt. It was subtle, so subtle that if she hadn't been paying attention, she might have missed it. But she saw it, and now the floodgates were open. Every question, every suspicion she had ever had about him came rushing to the forefront. "I trusted you," she said, her voice trembling as the emotion in her words broke through. "I've been trusting you, Daniel, but I don't know who you really are anymore. I don't know what's going on, and I need to find out."
For my own sanity.
For Lisa, for everything. The mention of Lisa's name cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Daniel flinched, a flash of pain crossing his features, but he quickly masked it, as though he were afraid of showing any weakness. "You don't understand," he repeated, but his voice was quieter this time, almost pleading. "There are forces at play here that you can't comprehend. If you walk into that meeting, if you go after the truth, you're not just risking your life. You're risking everything. All of us. This isn't just about physics or missing baryons anymore. This is about power, real power. And it's already too late to turn back." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, but Harris wasn't about to let fear stop her.
Not now.
She had already come too far. She had lost too much. The truth, no matter how dangerous it was the only thing that could bring her peace. She couldn't keep running. Not from the truth. Not from what she had uncovered. "I have to do this," she said firmly, her gaze locking onto Daniel's. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear that he was losing her to something that he could no longer control. Before Daniel could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. It was sharp, quick, insistent. Harris's heart skipped a beat. She motioned for Daniel to stay silent and crept toward the door. Her mind raced, wondering who it could be. Could it be the person who had been sending the messages? Or was it someone else, someone with answers, or someone with more questions? Harris opened the door slowly, her hand gripping the handle tightly. As the door creaked open, her breath caught in her throat. Standing on the other side was someone she never expected to see. Someone from her past. A face she thought she would never see again. The man standing before her was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority that seemed to radiate from him. His cold eyes locked onto hers as if he were a predator and she was the prey. But it wasn't just his appearance that shocked her. It was the sheer weight of the connection between them. She hadn't seen him in years. She hadn't even thought of him in years. "Hello, Harris," he said, his voice low, almost mocking. "It's been a long time, but I think it's time we finally talked." Everything in her world shifted in that moment. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble as the weight of his words sank in. This was no coincidence. This man, this figure from her past, was part of the puzzle. And with him came more questions, questions that would force her to confront the very core of the mystery she had been trying to unravel. But now, The stakes were higher than ever. Harris had no choice but to confront the truth, even if it meant risking everything, her safety, her future, and the last remnants of trust she had left in the people around her. Would she be able to uncover the truth without losing herself in the process? Or was this her last chance to escape before it was too late? The clock was ticking, and the truth was slipping through her fingers faster than she could grasp it. And the question was no longer whether she would survive this, but whether she would survive herself. The world seemed to close in around Harris as she stood face to face with the man from her past. There was no escape now, no turning back. Every step she'd taken to uncover the truth had led her here, to this moment, to this realization. This wasn't just about the missing baryons, about the particles and equations that had consumed her life. No, this was something far darker, far more insidious. What she had uncovered wasn't just a conspiracy. It was an entire network, a hidden world operating in the shadows, and she had been its unwitting pawn all along. The man in front of her, his cold eyes fixed on hers, smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. It was the same smile from years ago, the same look of calculated control that had haunted her in her nightmares. "You should have stayed away, Harris," he said softly, almost regretfully. "But you kept digging. Now look where we are." She wanted to ask him why. Why all of this? But the words were caught in her throat.
She was running out of time.
The walls around her seemed to press in, suffocating her with the weight of everything that was at stake. Her mind raced, her thoughts fragmented. She couldn't let him win.
Not now.
Not after everything she had already sacrificed. "Who else is involved?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Who else knows about this? You can't hide behind your games anymore." He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "You're too late, Harris. You don't understand the scale of this. This isn't just about you, or your little research project. This is global. This is beyond anything you ever imagined." Her breath caught in her chest. Global? What did that even mean? Her brain scrambled to make sense of it. She thought she was uncovering a missing piece of the universe's puzzle, but what if the puzzle itself was a lie? What if she had been part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous? "You're not the only one with secrets," the man continued, his voice dark and cold. "You've been looking in all the wrong places. But it doesn't matter anymore. The game's over. The truth will stay buried, one way or another." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, who had been standing silently in the background, his face unreadable. What had he known? How much had he been involved in this? The cold dread that had been gnawing at her intensified. She turned to him, her voice trembling with the rawness of the emotion she could no longer hide. "What do you know about this? What did you bring me into?" Daniel's eyes shifted, his gaze faltering. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the man in front of them raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't bother, Daniel. You're in too deep now." His words were sharp, dismissive, as if Daniel was nothing more than a pawn to be discarded. Harris's stomach churned. Was Daniel just a pawn? Was everyone she'd trusted in on this, playing their own part in the game? Or worse, had they all been manipulated, just like she had? The man stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming, suffocating. "It's too late for redemption," he said quietly, almost sympathetically. "The forces we're dealing with," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "They're untouchable. They're bigger than you, bigger than all of us." The air between them seemed to thicken as he spoke, the threat in his voice sinking into her bones like a chill that would never leave. Harris clenched her fists, fighting the surge of fear rising in her throat. She couldn't afford to back down now. She had come too far. She had no choice but to keep pushing. "You're lying," she spat, her voice cutting through the tension. "You don't scare me." The man's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. She had struck a nerve. But before she could react, Daniel's voice, barely a whisper, broke through the silence. "Harris, that's true," he said, his voice thick with regret. "Everything he's saying, it's true. You don't know what you're up against. They're everywhere. They've been watching us. Watching you. For years." Harris's mind went blank. She turned to him, her heart pounding as the gravity of his words settled in. "What are you talking about? Who are they?" But before Daniel could answer, the sound of distant footsteps echoed from the hallway, sharp and deliberate. Someone was coming. Harris's eyes darted toward the door, panic flooding her senses. It was a trap. This entire thing was a trap. And now, the walls were closing in faster than she could process. The man in front of her saw the panic flash across her face and smiled, the smug expression on his features sending a wave of nausea through her. "It's too late for answers, Harris. You should have stayed out of this. You should have stayed away." The door to the apartment burst open, and Harris froze, her blood running cold. Two men, dressed in black suits, stepped into the room, their eyes scanning the scene with cold precision. They weren't here for conversation. They weren't here for answers. They were here to clean up the mess. And it was clear that Harris was the mess. The room erupted into chaos. Daniel lunged for the man, but before he could reach him, one of the suited men grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into the wall. Harris's breath hitched, but there was no time to process it. Her mind raced, calculating her options, weighing the danger. She couldn't fight these men. She couldn't even escape. The truth she had been so desperate to uncover, had led her straight into a trap that was slowly tightening around her. As the suited men closed in on her, her thoughts raced. What had Daniel meant? Who were they? What was this secret they had all been a part of? She tried to make sense of it, but the noise around her grew louder, the urgency of the situation drowning out everything else. The man from her past, the one who had lured her here, watched it all with cold detachment. He had orchestrated everything. He had been the one pulling the strings. Harris's mind snapped back to reality just as one of the suited men reached for her. But before she could react, the power went out. Darkness descended like a thick veil, and the only sounds were the heavy breathing of the men and the pounding of her heart in her ears. It was too late. The truth was slipping away, and the only thing Harris could do now was fight for her life. Would she be able to escape? Or was she already too deep into a conspiracy that would swallow her whole? The darkness closed in, and Harris realized with a sickening certainty, the game was far from over. Right, the climax of the story, where all the mysteries come to a head. Maybe the main character confronts the villain or uncovers a final piece of evidence that explains everything. This section should be intense, unpredictable, and filled with tension. Ensure the final battle, whether physical or psychological, is memorable and emotionally powerful. Keep viewers on the edge of their seats until the very last moment, but include one last unexpected twist that they didn't see coming. Maintain the natural, suspenseful storytelling in large paragraphs, avoiding short sentences or one-liners. Write the content by targeting U.S. audience. Use the keywords which are trending on YouTube search. The darkness felt suffocating, as if it was closing in on Harris from all sides, pushing her into a corner she couldn't escape. Her heart raced as she struggled to breathe, her senses heightened in the silence that followed the blackout. She couldn't see, couldn't hear beyond the pounding of her own blood in her ears, but she knew she had moments, just moments, to make a choice. To make a decision that could change everything. Suddenly, a sharp crack of light pierced the gloom, and the lights flickered back on. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. Harris blinked, her eyes adjusting, trying to make sense of the scene in front of her. The suited men had stepped back, their eyes now scanning the room as if the world had shifted into a new game. But the real twist, the one she hadn't expected, wasn't just the presence of these men. It was the person standing before her, a figure she never thought she'd see again. Not like this. "Did you really think you could uncover the truth?" The voice was cold, almost mechanical, but there was a certain edge to it that cut through the air. Harris's blood ran cold as her gaze locked on the man, the one who had once been a trusted ally, a colleague. But now, as he stood before her, his face twisted in a smirk, she realized the depth of the betrayal. The man she had trusted, the one who had helped her all these years, was the architect of the conspiracy she had been trying to unravel. It wasn't just about missing baryons anymore. This was about something far larger, something that threatened to destroy everything she had fought for. "You," she whispered, disbelief hanging in the air. Her mind spun, trying to process the reality of the situation. She had been used. Every step, every lead, every moment she thought she was getting closer to the truth had been part of a carefully crafted trap. The man before her, her former mentor, had been orchestrating the entire thing. He had played her like a pawn, feeding her just enough information to keep her digging deeper, while all along, he had been the one pulling the strings. He stepped forward, his expression a twisted reflection of the man she had once admired. "You were always too curious for your own good, Harris. But I knew, deep down, you'd never stop until you reached the end of this puzzle. And now you're here. But it's too late. The pieces are already in place." A surge of anger rose within her, her body trembling with the weight of the realization. How could she have been so blind? How could she have trusted him? She had been so focused on finding answers about the missing baryons, on solving the riddle of the universe's missing matter, that she had ignored the truth staring her in the face. The people she had been trusting were part of the lie. They were complicit in hiding not just the missing particles, but something far darker, far more insidious. But there was one thing she couldn't quite shake off, the nagging feeling that there was still more to uncover. Something that didn't fit. Something wasn't adding up. And in that moment of overwhelming despair, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Harris's eyes flicked to something, a small object on the table behind the man, barely visible in the dim light. It was a notebook she recognized. A notebook that had once belonged to someone else, someone who had vanished years ago. Her pulse quickened. It couldn't be. That person was supposed to be dead. The notebook was filled with cryptic notes, half-finished equations, and scattered thoughts, but the one thing she remembered was the name written on the inside cover, Jared. Jared had been a colleague, an ally. He had disappeared without a trace, and everyone had assumed he had been silenced, just another casualty of the conspiracy. But there, in front of her, was his notebook. And that meant something had gone wrong. "You know what this is, don't you?" the man said, his voice now almost mocking. "You think you've uncovered the truth, but this is just the beginning, Harris. You've been following the wrong trail all along." Her mind raced. The notebook. Jared. The missing pieces. Harris lunged forward, her hand swiping across the table as she grabbed the notebook and flipped it open. Her fingers trembled as she scanned the pages, her eyes widening in shock as the words jumped out at her. The equations, the cryptic phrases, it all pointed to one thing. The missing baryons weren't just particles. They were keys. Keys to something much more dangerous, something much larger than anyone had realized. She could feel the floor shift beneath her. The ground was slipping away. The truth was something far darker than she had ever anticipated. And as the realization dawned on her, her breath caught in her throat. The baryons weren't gone. They were hidden deliberately, methodically, to protect a secret so dangerous that the very existence of it could tear apart everything she thought she knew about the universe. The man stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he watched Harris piece it together. "You really thought you could stop this?" he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "You were never meant to know. No one was. The experiment, the research, it's all part of something bigger. Something that's already in motion. And now you're in it, whether you like it or not." Her mind reeled as she connected the dots. The missing baryons were not just a cosmic mystery. They were part of a cover-up, a conspiracy that had been in the works for decades. The particles were being hidden, not to protect the universe, but to hide something far worse. Something that, if unleashed, could destroy everything she had ever believed in. Before she could process it fully, the man stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "The game's over, Harris. You're too deep in. You'll never get out alive." Harris's eyes locked onto his. There was no turning back. No escaping the truth now. But just as the weight of the situation threatened to crush her, a loud crash echoed through the room. The door burst open, and in the doorway stood Daniel, holding a weapon, his face bloodied but determined. "Get down," Daniel shouted, his voice urgent. In that split second, everything seemed to freeze. Harris dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the gunshot that rang out. The man's expression morphed into one of pure rage as he turned to face Daniel, but it was too late. The truth had been uncovered. The final piece of the puzzle had been revealed. And now, the battle for survival had begun. The conspiracy was no longer just a theory, it was a fight for their lives. Harris's heart raced, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The answers had come too late, and now there was only one thing left to do: survive. The aftermath was silent, eerie in its stillness. The chaos of the previous moments seemed to dissipate into the air like smoke, leaving behind only the faint echoes of gunshots and shouts that once filled the room. Harris sat in the corner, her mind still racing, trying to process everything that had unfolded. Daniel was beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his breath still heavy from the adrenaline of the last few minutes. They had managed to escape the immediate danger, but the truth that had been revealed would never be easy to forget. The man who had once been her mentor was gone, his betrayal exposed in a way that no one could deny. His involvement in the conspiracy, the orchestrated cover-up of the missing Baryons, had shaken the very foundation of everything Harris had believed. She had hoped, naively, that finding the truth would bring clarity, but what she found was far more complicated. It wasn't just about the Baryons or the universe's missing matter. It was about the power that certain people held over knowledge, over the truth itself. The dark web of lies that had been spun was far deeper than she could have ever imagined, and the people who controlled it weren't going to let go easily. As the hours passed, they found themselves standing outside the building that had once been the epicenter of their investigation. The city stretched out before them, alive with the hum of the world going on, oblivious to the chaos that had just occurred. Harris looked at Daniel, his face bruised but resolute. The weight of the secrets they had uncovered still pressed heavily on her chest, but there was a small sense of relief. She had survived, and so had Daniel. But the victory was bittersweet. There were still questions that lingered in the air, things that couldn't be easily explained away. The notebook, the missing pieces, the conspiracy, it was far from over. "Do you think it'll ever stop?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice distant. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something he couldn't name. Harris nodded, but a part of her felt the weight of the question in a new way. They had fought so hard to expose the truth, to bring the missing pieces of the puzzle to light, but now, more than ever, she realized the truth wasn't always enough. There were powers in play, forces beyond their understanding, and sometimes the truth was a weapon more dangerous than any lie. As much as she wanted to walk away, to move on, she knew that wouldn't be possible. The people behind the conspiracy wouldn't let them go that easily. They had shown their hand, but the game wasn't over yet. In the back of her mind, a nagging feeling lingered. Was the conspiracy really over? Or had they just uncovered a new layer of something even darker? And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the message that flashed across the screen. "You're not done yet. There's more to this than you know." She stared at the words for a long moment, her fingers trembling as she read and reread the message. The sender was untraceable, the message cryptic, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The puzzle had only just begun, and they were right in the middle of it. Harris glanced at Daniel, who was looking at her, his expression filled with both concern and determination. He didn't need to say anything. She knew what he was thinking. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had fought to uncover the truth, but now they realized the truth itself was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. There were still questions to answer, still pieces to find. But now, more than ever, they were in the game, and they couldn't back down. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the city, Harris took a deep breath. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how deep the conspiracy ran, or what the next step would be. But one thing was certain. She had crossed a line. There was no going back now. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And with that thought, Harris turned away from the horizon and walked into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. But the lingering question still echoed in her mind. Who was behind the message? And what was the truth that they were still hiding? The answers were out there, waiting to be uncovered. And she wasn't about to stop until she had them all. The mystery was far from over. And as the screen faded to black, the final words flashed on the screen. To be continued.